record in case people want to go to the recording after. I don't know how many actually look at it because I do record them and put them up on YouTube, and then I'm like, oh, one view. Like, so I don't know how many people actually go to the recording, but I'll put it there just in case. So my name is Dr. Alicia Schatteman. I'm the director of the Center for Nonprofit and NGO Studies here at Northern. I've been here, this is my 11th year, I guess. Yeah, 2010. So I got an email from Human Resources about a month ago saying, hey, your 10th anniversary is coming up. I'm like, nope. that was a year and a half ago, but that's okay. You guys were busy doing other things, so I totally get it. I think there's going to be a plaque or something. I don't know. So 11 years, and I'm now the director of our center. It's an undergraduate program in nonprofit and NGO studies. We're one of the few kind of interdisciplinary degree programs like that in the country. But we also have graduate programs now in nonprofits and even a PhD in philanthropy. So these things just did not exist in many places. So we're very fortunate to have the degree program here. At NIU, we have our undergraduate program, but then we do a lot of community engagement and reaching out to nonprofits across Northern Illinois, both within trying to do outreach for our students, so connect them to classrooms, experiences, capstones, internships, all of that good stuff. So think of us as a resource if something comes up and you're like, I wonder if anybody has an idea about that at NIU. Just send it to me and I can probably ask somebody or connect you with someone that might have that idea. We have a bunch of new things coming up, we hope, for internships. So we're always looking to get our students some real practical experience in the sector. So if you are interested in having an undergraduate or a graduate student intern, let us know and I'll kind of connect you with some of those opportunities. I worked for about 10 years before going back to get my PhD. 4 years of that was spent as executive director. So I know the angst of many of you who are in that role and the time and pressure that you're in to do that. I love working now, being a professor and working with so many of these organizations that I get to dip into your life for a little bit, which is so much fun. And then go back to teaching and research and stuff. But I love learning what all of you are doing as well. So maybe we can just go around and you can give a little bit of an introduction because we're a small group and tell us what you hope to get out of the session today. So I'll see if I can do this so I don't lose track. Kate.
Hi, I am Kate Fossum. I'm the Director of Advancement at Child's Voice, which is a small nonprofit based in Wooddale, but that serves the whole Chicago region, changing the lives of kids who have hearing loss. We help them learn how to listen and talk. So it's a very exciting place to be. My role involves fundraising, outreach, and awareness. So lots of importance of the things that Alicia deals with these topics. So, and I've been at Child's Voice 11 years, but have been ironically 11 too, but have been doing fundraising for probably, almost 20.
It hurts sometimes to say those big numbers. Yeah. Nicole.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nicole, or Nikki is fine, Tickner, and I serve as the vice president for a nonprofit in Rockford called Children's Safe Harbor, and we provide safe exchange and visitation services for families who are impacted by family violence. We are in the process of changing many things, looking, we're a growing agency, and one of the things we're looking at is our mission and vision statement. So I thought today would be helpful for that.
Yeah, great. Thank you,
Thank
Nikki.
you.
Dawn, if you're able to join us. Let's see if your audio is working. There she is.
There I am. Sorry, trying to work with 3 screens didn't work very well for me, so I apologize.
That's okay.
But thank you for letting me join. I'm Dawn Schaefer. I am the executive director of Kishwaukee Special Recreation Association here in DeKalb. And we serve 5 different districts, but really we're open to anyone in DeKalb County to come to our programs. They're for people with special needs, and we're the fun one, so that's all we do. We're best known for Camp Maple Leaf. So if you know Camp Maple Leaf, you do know us. So we're one and the same. And I was really interested in this. We actually just started, I did a lot of paperwork, and just started our foundation. So we now have a foundation also that is a non-for-profit 501c3 as soon as the IRS approves all of that paperwork. And I know that the foundation will need its own mission and vision, and KSRA, I keep kind of tweaking our mission and vision, so I want to make sure I'm doing it correctly. So I appreciate this information and
Great.
hope to learn more.
I'm curious why you went down the road of creating the second nonprofit. And you don't have to give me the whole backstory, but totally curious.
Well, KSRA is actually a governmental entity because we are funded by 90% of taxes. So if you live in one of our 5 districts, on your property tax bill, it'll say recreation services, and then it'll say special or unfortunately handicap services. That's us.
Got it.
So the KSRA is not a non-for-profit, although we don't make any money, heavens knows.
Right.
We're governmental, but our foundation is the non-for-profit. So
got it. Nice. Thanks, Dawn.
Absolutely.
Miranda?
Hello.
Hi.
So my name is Miranda. I work for Helping Hands, and I hope when I share this part of the information with you guys, you don't boot me out. But as the lockdowns continue, the trainings and stuff are really limited around here. So guess where I'm from? Washington State.
That's awesome.
I was like, ooh, when you started sharing locations, I'm like, hopefully they're really nice and don't say not for you.
Oh, totally. Yeah. That's been the fun part of meeting people from across the country doing these. It's great.
Well, I really appreciate you guys opening this for people because we started out 35 years ago serving a couple hundred people, and we were primarily a food bank. And in 2020, we served over 710,000 individuals, which was like pretty huge.
Right.
We are a private nonprofit, so our funding does come, like 95% of it comes from the community. We do get some grants via our AmeriCorps troops and stuff like that. But programs is a new thing because we've seen such a huge spike in services other than the food. We're dealing with a huge homeless crisis and childcare crisis and, chemical dependency crisis. I mean, it's really bad right now. So we opened the programs department. I was kind of thrown into it. And so therefore I need to create my own missions and vision statement as well as policies and procedures.
Building the plane as you're flying it. That's great.
Oh, absolutely. And the runway. So I'm just really hoping to learn and be productive in this whole thing. So thank you for welcoming me from Washington State. You're amazing.
I love it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Miranda. Rosemary, if you're able to chat.
Sure. Good morning.
Morning.
Hi, I'm Rosemary. I'm more local. So I'm from the Rockford area. I work with a lot of not-for-profits. And so I thought it would be really helpful, much like Nikki was saying too, to get a better handle on our mission and vision statements. And so I'm really excited to be here. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you. Nancy.
Hello. So I'm Nancy Parch, and I'm with Barb Food Mart in DeKalb. Miranda, I can relate to some of the things you're saying. We serve the DeKalb School District, but since the pandemic hit, we really, the usage has exploded. It's more than doubled. We were a shopping model where our families would come in and shop, and now that we had to quickly change to drive-through, but we're reintroducing choice in many ways because we feel like families need to have choice. So we have a mission, but we're not sure if at the moment the mission needs to be relooked at and kind of rechecked as to moving forward. Can we go back? Or do we see actually drive-through gives a little more access, but a little less choice? So, we're just looking at all of those issues that we were forced to look at in the last year, and some really good things have come out of it, but it's time, now it's time to relook at that. So that's what I'm hoping to gather today.
Awesome. Thanks, Nancy. Wendy.
Hi guys, I'm Wendy Vaughn. I work at NIU with Alicia. I am a clinical professor at the College of Law, and I'm also an associate with the Center for Nonprofit and NGO Studies. So I get to work with Alicia in that respect as well. But I'm mainly here because, like Nikki, I am a board member of Children's Safe Harbor. We do have a mission. I'm not sure if we have a vision. I don't think we have a stated vision. And in my mind, I'm a founding board member of this little nonprofit. I think we've had some mission drift, or maybe just new ideas about what the mission should be. That has caused us to look at it. I'm not sure if we even have a consensus about what the mission is. So as we tried to write it, some of us were writing a very narrow mission. Some of us were writing a more aspirational mission. And so I think we need help about what is the difference between the mission and the vision.
Yeah.
And we can take that back to our board and try to help us think about whether we like what we have or if we really do need to change it and how.
Yeah. Thanks, Wendy.
Yeah.
Claudia.
We're veterans helping veterans, education, housing, just about everything.
Great. And how long have you been operating the nonprofit?
A couple of years.
Okay.
A couple of years.
Yeah.
It's my post. I'm American Legion,
Okay.
and it's my post, and I figured might as well just do the nonprofit so we can get some grants and
Sure.
help more people. Yeah.
Sure. Well, thank you. I mean, I think we'll have a good discussion again, because we're a small group. We'll try to make this as interactive as possible. So I do have some slides that I'll share with you, but I want to, anytime that you're like, oh, I didn't understand that, or I have a question about that, just jump in. So you can keep your mics on if you want. That's totally fine. It'll be like a small group, a small group discussion. All right. So let me go to, because I do have a couple of slides to help guide our conversation, I guess today is the best way to put it. And again, I'm on multiple screens, so we're going to see if this is going to work. I think I've got a flip potentially here. Okay. All right. I think I've got to flip it. How's that? Does that look right on your end?
We're seeing the presenter view with the little one on the right, which is fine, but
Yeah, no, I can, I think I should be able to flip. Maybe. So what about if I do that?
Yep.
Okay. It's always one way or the other. Get it wrong.
Totally.
Okay. I do have the chat function up. I just can't see you. So if you do want to jump in, just jump in. But I do have the chat function up too. Okay. So I've been writing during 2021 about strategic planning, and I've done a lot of strategic planning with organizations. So this is a draft book manuscript that's under review by editors right now. So we'll see. But I started writing this because when I looked to find what was being said or taught or in workbooks or textbooks or whatever about the issues around values, vision, and mission, but then how that kind of relates to a strategic plan, either they were too heavy, there was just too much there and it was hard to distill, or there was almost like an airport book, like here's 5 things you can do today, that kind of stuff. So this, I think, is kind of in the middle. It's meant to be a book that's accessible. It's grounded in academics, but it's meant to be accessible and practical. So, well, we'll see. I have to do some editing, but how I broke it up was this notion of readiness. And that's really what I'm going to mostly concentrate on today, is around readiness. Because if you think of your values, vision, and mission as really the foundation of the organization, you have to have that before you do any of the other pieces when it comes to strategic planning. So that's really where this fits in, is under that readiness spot, I guess. I probably don't have to tell any of you what, and many of you already said it, with COVID and everything that's going on right now, nonprofits are under tremendous pressure to provide increased service, and at the same time have been really hampered by financial things, for sure. So we've certainly seen impact of COVID on fundraising specifically, but also on anything that's face-to-face. So lots of different challenges with COVID. And it is a good time, I think, now that we're through, hope through the crisis points of COVID, to see what does it look like on the other side? How are we kind of moving into like recovery mode almost as an organization? And some of that is a little bit dependent on where you are and what I call, not me personally, but what is generally known, kind of organizational life cycle. This is a good book that I'll refer people to sometimes because it's useful to think about how your organization behaves at each kind of stage of its life cycle. And if you have kids or you've been around kids, it's very similar. Startup founding organizations look, feel, act differently than organizations that might be around for 100 years or something. It attracts different people, both in the staff as well as board members. There's a little bit, when you're younger, there's a little bit more flexibility and nimbleness to these organizations. They're still growing and figuring out who they are. So there's some identity kind of things going on. And that's also where it's tempting to go in a whole bunch of different directions. So if you could think of the last time you were around like a 2 or 3 year old, that's a completely different experience because they want to run in 8 directions at the same time. And you're kind of just corralling at that point. I use a lot of kid references, so I apologize in advance because I have 6 kids. So it reminds me so much of dealing with kids at certain points in time. So that kind of founding segment, that's where mission becomes really important, but it also means it's going to change more regularly than it might with an established organization. And then kind of in that next cycle, when it goes through that notion of when we hire maybe our first staff person, wherever they're coming from, I think that's a big pivoting point for when you hire that first staff person. And then you move kind of into that stabilization that we have a few staff members now. We feel like we know what we're doing. We kind of have a good history where we have a good reputation. We have a good board. So you're kind of in a stable mode. But then as organizations move into the next stage it's kind of like at 55 years old saying, do I really want to do this for the next 15 years or should I do something else? Do I need to retool my skills, whether that's going back to school or switching sectors? It's the same kind of thing with a nonprofit. If we do nothing, we might just be in a slow decline, or should we revitalize and think through what does that look like for the next phase? So your life cycle also determines some of this and how quickly or how you're adjusting. And so this slide just gets at what does that look like? So nonprofits as a whole, and this data is coming from NCCS, so the National Center for Charitable Statistics. You can look them up. They roughly 30% of organizations fall under $100,000. So very small, a founding board, that no staff, those kinds of things. That what they determine kind of that middle, the 100 to 500 is where you have a couple of staff. The board becomes less about who's going to show up on Saturday and make sure that the tables are set up to, do we have a human resource policy to deal with something? So they move to a more of a policy, although you're still using a lot of volunteers. So this might be some of your organizations that you mentioned. You might have a few staff, especially in like food distribution, those kinds of things. They're usually human resource intensive. So those kind of organizations fit into that. And then that next stage, that 500,000 to 5 million, there's only 24% of those. You're definitely growing professional staff, more sophisticated policies. And then we have very few nonprofit organizations that actually reach that $5 million threshold. Most, 80% of the organizations in the country are very small. So it's a very small segment that actually gets to be that big. And those organizations tend to have long histories, a lot of endowments. And this is where you're going to see primarily education and healthcare would fall in here as kind of hitting that $5 million threshold. So just to kind of give you a sense of what the scope of the sector looks like, but also kind of where your individual organizations fall. So is that useful to kind of lay out the size and scope of the organizations? And maybe that's where some of you are kind of figuring out, well, we're having a hard time doing this or that, because you might be between those, or you're transitioning into the next stage of your life cycle. Does anybody have any thoughts on that at this point?
Yes, that's useful information. We were always, $1 million organization. And this year, I think we're like 6 or 8 million. We're falling in between there. So
right,
it's been a really huge change in a lot of different ways. So I appreciate you addressing that.
Yeah, and I think some of that growth wasn't anticipated, right? So it's unanticipated growth. You had to change very quickly. and you couldn't really plan for it. And I think that's the strange thing with COVID, is that you're now in a new situation that you couldn't anticipate. And how do you react? I think what we're seeing in some of the research that's coming out, in the short term, there's been such an infusion of resources from government as well as private funders that financially organizations overall, nonprofits are doing okay, because they were able to make ends meet with some of those, special funds. What will be interesting over the next year is, as those resources, those temporary resources, kind of shrink or go away, what are we left with? Are we left with a stronger sector, or we're left with a smaller sector because organizations are closing or shrinking? We don't know. It's kind of it's a active research question. We don't know. But I think,
that's something that I've seen. A lot of people were coming in bringing their stimulus checks because they just couldn't use them, or they didn't need them or something. So that's like a one-time donation, in my opinion.
Right.
And that's something I'm struggling with, because as an organization, we're counting on this same funding for next year. And like I said, we're privately funded, and I just feel it's going to happen that way. People are going to be going back to work. The stimuluses are going to be gone, yada, yada, yada. And so I think that we need to prepare for still serving the amount of people we're serving, because they're still going to need help, but the funders aren't going to be there.
Right.
So.
Right. No, and those are all good reasons to kind of look at your organization where you are now and think about, what are we able to resource going forward? So you were probably able to do a lot of things because the resources were coming in, but now as those resources start to shrink, what will you have to shed or give up or partner in order to provide similar things rather than do it all, right? And I think that's definitely a challenge, and certainly where values and mission can come in. For those of you who've ever gone bowling, which is this is a random metaphor, but if you've ever gone bowling and you've used the bumpers, right? When you put the bumpers up, it kind of keeps you in your lanes, and it makes sure that your balls don't go all over the place. Same kind of thing with your values, mission, and vision. If you use them, they can be useful. But if you don't, it's like having no bumpers, right? And it's the same kind of discipline, I would say, that organizations have to use when it comes to their budgets. A budget is just a planning document. It's not a decree. It's not a law. There's nothing saying you have to adhere to your budget. But organizations that are disciplined have a much easier time adhering to their budget. And it's the same thing with values, vision, and mission. If you can ignore them, they're just written words. But if you really believe in them, then it helps to kind of keep your organization reined in. So this notion of figuring out where you are and how does that translate to values, vision, and mission, then, is that when I do strategic planning, that's really, we have to start the conversation exactly where we're starting it right now. And when I've done board retreats, for example, like a day-long retreat, when we could do those in person, a half a day could be spent just on values, vision, and mission. And everybody's like, no, let's come up with the plan. I'm like, oh, we have to start at the foundational level. And if we have that, then we can start to build on top of it. But you really do have to start with this stuff. The other tension, and it's related to what we were just talking about, COVID, this tension between efficiency and effectiveness. This is just something, and all of you who've been around nonprofits long enough to know, you deal with this every day, right? We have to balance the careful usefulness of our resources, but also meeting the mission. And sometimes those are actually at odds. And that's why I say nonprofit work is harder than business. Because here's why. You can ignore markets in business because they're not profitable. But as a nonprofit, you don't pick your clients. You don't pick the people who need your services. You can decide if you want to serve those individuals, but they're going to show up because you're in that space. And it might not be financially efficient to serve them. Particularly if they're in a location that's hard to get to, or English isn't their first language, or they don't have a college degree, and all of those things, those are all barriers and are expensive for your resources to be able to reach those individuals. So that tension is there. And that's something you have to grapple with as an organization when you're thinking through what your mission is, because that's on the program effectiveness side. Are we actually meeting the mission? Do we know we're meeting the mission? And then how can we do that, as efficiently as possible? So I just want to acknowledge that the work that you're trying to do is much more complicated, in my opinion, than a for-profit business that's purely running on a financial efficiency model when you compare it to kind of a nonprofit model. So we always start with values. And, when I started doing strategic planning consulting, I guess probably 10 years ago, it wasn't something I set out to do. I just kind of enjoyed it. And I got tagged along with another faculty member who was asked to do strategic planning for a local seniors housing. It's a nonprofit, and they offer housing all the way through from independent, townhomes, all the way through to basically assisted living and Alzheimer's care. So a continuum of service. And it's one of the largest nonprofits we have here in the county. I think it's around 3 million or so. So it's a pretty large complex. And that was the first strategic planning that I did. And I didn't think through it. I was just kind of tagging along with the faculty member. And as I started doing it more and more, organizations wanted to jump to mission because that's what's legally required, right? That's really the only thing you have to provide to the IRS in terms of, their documentation. You don't have to provide a vision statement. It's not required by anybody. The state doesn't require it. So organizations tend to jump to mission first, or only sometimes. They might only have those documents. And I think some of you mentioned that too, that you're not, you may not have a vision statement. So I like to back it up even a little bit further to think about your values as an organization. And to kind of make that a little bit clearer. So the values kind of drive the vision and mission. The mission is kind of third in this little scenario because it really helps you articulate what do you believe in. And I'll give you some examples. So your values are those things that you're going to hold yourselves accountable for. So the things that your organization kind of standards, I guess. They're ways that we can demonstrate to individuals that we're serving what they can expect. It allows you to differentiate potentially from other organizations. And that doesn't mean in a negative way. It just might mean this organization looks at the world from this perspective and your organization looks at the world from this perspective. They're not wrong. They're just different. And then how do you live up to your values in everything that you do? So I'll give you an example. And if you guys have examples, here, chime in, because these things aren't often written down, but you probably can describe your organizational values if you thought about it. So this organization doesn't exist anymore. But when I first moved to DeKalb, we were looking for a doctor. And so this new clinic opened and it was going to be accessible to everyone. Basically, if you had the ability to pay, they encouraged you to use your insurance. And if you didn't have the ability to pay, they, and I guess they were set up as a nonprofit, that they had funds that they would offer medical services to individuals who are uninsured. I'm like, well, that sounds great. I need a doctor and I have insurance. So that sounds like a place I want to go. And as I read about it, it was great because that's just something I believe in, that we should have access to healthcare, and it drives everything else. It certainly drives health in our schools and health in the workplace and all that stuff. So I totally I drank the Kool-Aid. I was in. So I showed up and I think it was a woman at the front desk. She took all my information. I sat down, no big deal. And then another family came in and they were Spanish speaking. And the adult didn't speak English. So she brought her younger son, I believe. And they, through translation, the individual was asking why they were here. And she said, oh, do you have government identification? And through translation, they didn't quite understand what she was asking for, but they needed to have government ID that they are residents of Illinois. And it had to be in their name at an address. And it turned out that they didn't have that. They didn't have it. They had a passport from, I believe it was Mexico where they were from, but they didn't have any government ID for the state of Illinois. And so they were turned away. And I'm like, okay, the whole point was that you said you wanted to have this clinic for individuals that were uninsured. That probably should have been something you anticipated, that these individuals might not have government ID, for example. And that was one of the reasons I actually came here, that I think, again, everybody should have access to healthcare. So that was one of the reasons I was willing to support it. So it's not like you can just say, individuals should be valued, fill in the blank, and they should all have access to free healthcare, regardless of residency, regardless of legal status, whatever it happens to be. Those things really need to be articulated, but then you also have to, how are we going to do that, right? So how are we going to set up our policies, practices, procedures? How are we going to train volunteers? How are we going to train staff? on those values then, because it's not just we value everyone. How do we say we do that then? What are the policies and procedures that can back that up? So if you ask, this is sometimes a good exercise, is ask your staff or ask your volunteers, why do you like coming here? Why do you spend your career or your time with us? What are the things about this organization that look and feel different than other organizations? They'll start articulating your values and it might not be written down, but it's a really good place to start to get that kind of feedback from individuals. And I'll give you another example. There's an organization, kind of an environmental organization, I guess is the best way to put it. I try not to use names. And when they started thinking about their values, really a sense of, respect for the earth and not wanting to harm the planet and not wanting to use, chemicals in any of their buildings, all that kind of stuff. It wasn't anything that they had articulated, but everybody believes in everybody around the organization knew that those were their values. They just hadn't really thought about it and wrote them down, except when they had an opportunity to apply to a funder. And this happened to be a corporate funder, I believe. And this corporate funder was well known for lacking environmental standards. They did not promote healthy living and environmental issues. And it came to the board, and the board declined to pursue that funding because it didn't resonate with their values. It's just like, it's not something we want to attach our name to. It's not something that we believe in. So they turned away from that funding. So that's where your values, are not just statements, they should be lived. And I think that's the kicker thing. Oh yeah, Claudia, you had a question around slides. I'm happy to send you slides. That's fine. If anybody would like those. I am recording too, so I can definitely send you the recording, but if anybody wants slides, let me know. A lot of them you'll see are just more questions. We spent a lot of time kind of thinking through these things. So I think as you think about this, it's really interesting to, and you could take a minute because we have some time, take a minute and think about what the values of your organization are. If you had to articulate them, what would you say? So is it around the people that you serve? Is it around the community that you live in? Is it around environmental or things that are external, something like that? Whatever they are, start to think about that and how your organization then is going to really live those things. And I don't want to, sometimes we turn to values as being kind of mushy or marketing, and I don't want it to be that. So, if you, and you're not going to write this, but pretend you wrote down like customer service. I think those words just get bantered around too much that we don't actually know what customer service means anymore. and that needs to be explained. So you can articulate them both as like, say one word like empathy, but what does that mean? And then you can put like a description after that. And have that discussion probably at the board level. What does this mean if we say that we value to serve all individuals regardless of immigration status, for example? Well, what does that mean in our programs, in our staff, and our volunteers? Like, how are we going to serve those individuals? Some of you are also in the food kind of distribution, and that's something that's always, you run into that situation of, proof of residency, and what does that look like? And so those are things I think that are really useful to think about when you're writing down your values. And sometimes when I do this as part of a little board retreat, I might have some lists of values that people can kind of look through and identify those. Did someone have a question, Miranda?
Oh no, I was
Okay.
just thinking that, yeah, it is customer service to an extent, because just because our services are free
Yeah.
to the people we're serving, somebody is paying for them. So they are
Right.
a paid service. Our donors are actually paying for them, or grants or whatever it may be. So that's what I always tell our staff and volunteers. We have to treat our participants as paying customers because somebody did pay for it.
Right.
So,
Yep. No, I totally agree. So it's that that kind of ethic should infuse the organization, and it makes talking about vision and mission a little bit clearer, which hopefully we're going to talk about that next. So that'll be a little bit clearer. But I do recommend you start to write these down and have those discussions, because it will influence fundraising. It certainly will influence marketing and branding. It should influence program delivery, all of those things. Okay, so next after values, if you have an idea, this is who we are, right? This is our stake in the ground. This is what we stand for. This is how we're going to treat people, all of those things. And I think those are really good discussions to have. Then your vision is, what does success look like? And I know, as a former executive director, sometimes I say recovering executive director, the day-to-day consumes you, right? The day-to-day stuff is all encompassing. It's exhausting, especially during COVID, I can only imagine. So it's very hard to think that far ahead. What does success look like? But if you don't know, it's going to be really hard to steer the ship in that direction, right? So a vision really describes, what the organization would look like if you successfully accomplished your mission. So if all of those things worked and your mission was carried out, what does the world look like? And that's how it's different than a mission. Vision is more like aspirational. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's probably not going to happen next year. But we're all moving towards that direction. So I'll give an example, because sometimes these are useful to think about. An organization that serves persons with intellectual disabilities. And they do job training with these individuals. And so their mission is related to that. We provide X amount of services to train people with disabilities to lead successful lives or something. That's a bad mission statement, but let's pretend that's what it is. The vision, because they can do all of that stuff. And many of your missions, as we get into mission statements, many of mission statements are written like, here's what we're going to do to you or for you, right? So we're going to provide, educate, maintain, all of those kinds of things. A vision is a little bit bigger. What does success look like? Well, if this organization can provide all of that training, it doesn't really matter if no one hires them. They can do training 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. But if we haven't changed attitudes, if we haven't changed hiring practices, the training doesn't matter, right? So the vision is bigger. It's potentially something like, a world where we embrace people for all of their abilities rather than their disabilities, and we all are active participants in our economy. Again, I'm spitballing, but that's the idea, is if we realized our mission, here's what the world would look like. And that's sometimes hard for organizations to grapple with because you're so mired in the day-to-day stuff, right? And I know there's a few people here in that kind of food provision area. So what does the world look like if you accomplished your mission? Food is a basic need for sure. Is it about providing more and more food? Probably not. Right? I don't think that's where you want to get to if you accomplished your mission, is that you're just providing more food to more and more people. Your vision is probably bigger in terms of you want to reduce food insecurity. You want people to be able, maybe to grow their own food, whatever it happens to be, so that we actually see a decline in the need to go to other sources of food, for example. So having those kind of good discussions around what does the world look like if we accomplished our mission really sets people on a solid path. So when you think about your vision, it's also about, does everybody share that vision? Staff, board, do your external stakeholders, so whether that's funders or others, do they understand and know what your vision is? Do they know where you're going versus another organization? And where's the kind of mismatch in some of that? And I think I'll give you one more kind of example. So a mission statement is around this declaration of purpose. This is why we exist. And the vision is a description of what that kind of future world looks like. So when I came to NIU in 2010, we did some strategic planning in our department in public administration. And public administration is a fairly male-dominated field so far. Very few at the top are female leaders. And as a program in the MPA program started here over 50 years ago, it was kind of revolutionary at the time. But so we had to put it in our mission statement that we were going to educate men and women. That's pretty funny. That you had to put that in there. But again, this was, the 1960s. So that was a declaration of purpose. We were saying we're going to educate men and women, and that was in there. So missions should evolve. but your vision likely won't change too much. Our vision is, say in the MPA program, was around having, well-managed communities, et cetera, by professionals, whatever it happens to be. So that's the big vision. Whereas our mission was much narrower. It was that idea of providing this graduate education. So that's a little bit of the difference between mission and vision. So thoughts or questions on your own mission and vision? Are there still some grayness in there, or is this coming a little bit clearer?
Do you believe that it should revolve around maybe a 5-year plan? Is that kind of the general?
Do you mean a strategic plan?
Yeah, like our mission. So our vision. Should we be talking about where we want to be in 5 years, or should we make it?
Your vision should
3
be
years?
no. I think your vision is the long-term thing. Your mission is the shorter term, because
Yeah.
how things happen is more in the short term.
Okay.
Your vision is the world that's broader. So sometimes I'll use, 10, 15, even 20 years. What does that look like? If you're working on a big problem, then that's going to take the long view on that, right?
Okay.
The mission itself, and I'll bring up a sample mission statement in a minute, around libraries. So if you could imagine how libraries have changed in the last 10 years, right? They've completely changed. The vision of why we need libraries really hasn't changed that much. I think everybody still believes in, a lot of us believe in public libraries and public education, for example. That vision hasn't changed. It doesn't matter. It's the same as it was in the 1920s as it is now. It's, an informed citizenry and actively engaged and all of that stuff. So it's great. The mission of why they exist has changed somewhat, and certainly how they do their work has changed a lot. So those things are definitely much more shorter term. That vision is the longer game. Other thoughts or questions? I'm going to dig more into mission statements. Yeah, Wendy.
So this vision statement, is it something that you could conceivably accomplish? I think this is where we broke down in our group, because some of the visions were so big. They were great, but they didn't seem like they could actually be accomplished. Or if they could, they would be things that would be accomplished by many, many organizations, not our one small organization.
Right. So that's certainly a challenge. So I know some nonprofit organizations like, we're going to end hunger, or we're going to end poverty. And that's not a bad vision statement. If you truly believe that you want to work towards that goal, that's not bad. It's going to be large. It's going to take more than you. It's going to take government policy. It's going to take individuals. It's going to take multiple agencies. So I don't think it's bad that you have a very grandiose, inspiring vision that's maybe long-term, but it's definitely a balance, right? Because you don't want to get people like, oh, we're going to end poverty. Like, sure, we're going to end poverty. Like that's going to be a thing in my lifetime. Probably not. But if we believe it's possible, then we can orient ourselves in that direction. Partnerships become easier. Advocacy needs to happen then. It's going to change the organization. If we truly believe that's possible, then your whole organization is going to work more to that holistic view.
Okay.
If that helps.
Yeah.
Nikki, did you have a question or a thought? Nope. Susan? Hi. Welcome. Nice to have you. So let me dig into mission, because I think it also becomes a little bit clearer as well. So if you haven't read, and I think it's still on my bookshelf here, Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. He has a TED Talk too. So I like Simon Sinek. And it's Sinek, in case you want to look him up. He's done a lot of strategic planning work with government, military, and the private sector. Not as much on the nonprofit side, probably because he can't afford them. Maybe the big national ones could afford him as a consultant. But I like asking organizations that question. Why does your organization exist? So how does your organization fit into your community? Yes, you probably all respond to some kind of community need. Definitely. There's usually a gap in service left by either, and we talk about that, the government failure theory, right? So governments can't do everything. So the nonprofit sector moves in. The business sector won't do this because you can't make money at it. And the nonprofit sector is left in the middle. That's certainly the case for some nonprofit organizations. So I would say your human service organizations are probably oriented in that direction, but not all nonprofits. Sometimes it's well, these individuals are being served, but we could serve them better. Or these individuals are being served, but not in this way. And so we also make room for those kind of nonprofits as well. So why does your organization exist? To a lesser extent, it's about how, and to a much lesser extent, it's what do you do? And I think sometimes with mission statements, we get confused by that a little bit, and we want to talk about what we do on a daily basis. Well, we provide this, and then there's after school, and then we also do camps, and then we do this, that, like we just run off a litany of things, and we forget, why are we doing all that? And I think now's a good time to think about that as we're coming out of the pandemic. Why are we doing all the things that we're doing? And if we had to really concentrate our efforts, where should we invest those dollars? Because your budget is a demonstration of your organizational values. That's all it is. If you value your staff, you will compensate them well. And all of you are like, okay, well, that's probably not a great measure then, right? But they are really, they are your budget is your living your values is your budget. It's the same thing in your household. If you value, fresh fruit and vegetables, for example, you're willing to pay more, or you're willing to grow your own to get that, because that's part of your value system. It's the same with organizations. So if you want to invest in your people, you're going to have professional development dollars in your budget. That's just true, right? So they do live your values. So when you say this program gets X amount of dollars and this program gets X amount of dollars, you're ascribing a value to that investment. This means something to us, and this means something else. That's so when you think about the what that's going to change over time, but why are you doing those things? So this is, and I think really, if your mission statement, if you can figure out, can you answer that why question, your mission becomes a lot more clear, rather than focus on the what you do every day, and just kind of listing all of your activities. I think that's where we have to, when we're coming out of this COVID, I think now's an opportunity to do that. So a couple of other suggestions on your mission. As you think about your mission, using language that your constituents use, and constituents, you can replace that with anything, clients, members, however you want to use it, residents, but not using jargon or things that your audience just doesn't understand. It should be some kind of, you should be like, get excited. It should be some kind of emotional response to this, not just kind of a cold couple of facts. Communicating that why is really important, and not just the what or the how. You'll see that I have the breath test off to the left, and I will do this in consulting sometimes. If I have to take a breath reading your mission statement, it's too long. It's just a good thing. I don't tell you how many words it has to be, but if I have to breathe, it's too long. And I'm not a smoker. I can usually, I can talk for a long time without breathing. So single sentence, it sounds good when you say it out loud. It's something memorable, and it's something that's exciting, hopefully actionable and specific. So those are kind of the big takeaways. And I'll give you a couple of examples, which I think make this a little bit clear. And again, I'm happy to send slides, and again, I'll send you the recording. So when I first moved to the town where I live right now, this was their mission statement outside the library. And I kind of collect mission statements. So I like finding good ones as well as bad ones. And this is a good one. If you believe in public libraries, you're like, yes, I want to live in a community that is strong, literate, and well-informed. Love it. Like, I'm in. I don't care if they rent DVDs. I don't care if they have Saturday story time. Like, I don't care. But I care about that. And if you're the organization that does that, I'm in, right? I love it. That's really what you want to get to, versus we do this and this and this and this and this and this and that, is why are you doing all that stuff? That should be the focus of your mission. And so I'll give you a couple of examples of weak mission statements. And if you want to be brave, you can throw your mission statement in the chat, just so we can all share. But I'll give you a couple of bad ones, and I'm sure yours aren't this bad, but I'll give you a couple of bad ones. These are terrible. And they're terrible for lots of different reasons. Again, they kind of break all those rules I was telling you about. They're way too long. They use words that not everybody would know. They want to be everybody to everything. So unless you are a very large multi-million-dollar organization, you have to focus your mission to be really focusing those resources. So I love that this top mission statement is at the end, it says, enhance health, safety, welfare of people and their overall economic and social well-being. The federal government can't do that. Like, I just find this hilarious. And you're going to measure all of that? I think that is also very funny. When you say enhance health, safety, welfare, people, blah, 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 it's just too much. Like, I don't believe you because it's just too much. The one in the bottom is very large. The words are just not something that a normal human being would ever do. I personally like constellation of architecturally and culturally distinct museums. That's my favorite. And then it gets into listing all the things that they do. Exhibitions, publications. Oh, and 2 years ago, I could just have this conversation. Oh, we added digital platforms. We should include that in our mission statement. So that got in there. And then they serve both local and global audiences. If you happen to serve local and global, you can leave that out. You just serve everybody. So you're not even excluding a human on the planet. They're too big, right? So and the top one is from the State of New York Conservation Authority, and the bottom one is from the Guggenheim. Now that's some big egos all wrapped up into this stuff. So when you're thinking about mission statements, think about, can we actually do that? Do we actually do that? Do we know we do that? How would we ever possibly measure that? And what really is the focus of this organization? Not to do it all. So I'll give you some examples of, and then I'll look at your mission statements too. I'll give you some examples of kind of stronger mission statements. So here's a couple that I think are pretty good. So March of Dimes, I think is pretty clear. Make-A-Wish, Chicago Science and Industry, Reading in Motion is a Chicago-based nonprofit. I think they're pretty good. It gets at the why are we doing all of this stuff? That's really what you want to answer. And if you can do that, then your programs become much more clear. So I'll give you another example of what a mission statement that I've worked on. I think this was maybe a couple of years ago now. So St. Mary's Catholic School here in DeKalb, my kids have all gone there for elementary school. This was their mission statement. It was a paragraph. I think there's 3 sentences in there, give or take. It was just very, very large. And you could tell this happens like as soon as you get a committee, and I would say if you get a committee of really smart people, it's worse because everybody wants to add a word. Oh, no, we need to add this one. No, don't forget that we do that too. Just bananas. So we had to strip it down. What do we really want to do? What do we really focus on? And that's where we got to that mission statement. And when we got it, and it took a little while, but when we got to it, we're like, yeah, that's exactly why we exist. It's all of those other things we do, but it doesn't have to be in the mission statement. And I think we need to keep that in mind. I also bring up Einstein once in a while, explain it to a kid. They'll tell you if they don't get it. Just explain it. It's a great thing. So when you're thinking about your mission statement, some of it, and I mentioned this before, is can we measure that? And I think during COVID, this is particularly important because as investment starts to shrink away, like some of you have already said, those one-time infusion of cash will really start to dry up. How are we then going to demonstrate our impact going forward? And it does come to how are you measuring against your mission? So what are you trying to accomplish? Whether that's reducing, teen pregnancy, whether that's increasing food security, whatever it happens to be, how are you going to know you're doing that? What is your organization capable of? How do you know you're making progress? So if you can Google this Charting Impact. Charting Impact is a separate project of 3 organizations: Independent Sector, GuideStar, and Better Business Bureau. And they use 5 questions in a framework to help organizations kind of answer these questions. But so you can look it up. And if you accomplish those 5 questions, you answer those things. On GuideStar, you can earn your gold seal of transparency if you answer these questions. So there's an incentive, and if you go to GuideStar and if you check out other people's profiles in 990s, there actually is some research. The first time you earn a seal, you know, whether that's silver, platinum, whatever they are, the organizations that when they first get that seal, there is a bump in their fundraising. They do get a little bit of a warm glow effect from being rated. It's not as much about what level you're at, which is also kind of odd. So as you progress and you earn bronze versus gold, there's not the same effect. It is the first time you earn that seal that there's a fundraising positive effect. I didn't do that research, but I just find these things fascinating to think about. So it is a little bit about how can I measure my mission, and we teach lots of workshops and courses on this. But thinking through your mission, it should lead you to basically, and I'll throw up here, it should lead you to this notion of what is the impact we're trying to have in the world? Because someone said when donors give you money, they're not trading their dollars for a good or a service for them specifically, right? They're giving it so someone else can receive those benefits as a gift, which is great. But they're really, you know, the idea is they're investing in you because they believe you can provide that impact in the community. And that's really the change that you want to be able to say, oh, we contributed to that. And I know this is hard because impact is something that happens after your program or service is over. And certainly researching that is not easy, and it's not all just you, but you contributed to that. You contributed to someone's change in circumstance or whatever. So thinking about impact is really important as it relates to your mission, because if you're focused on impact, then you can make some of those decisions. So, you know, I'll give an example. As an organization, you want to have an impact on improving literacy rates for children in second grade. I don't know, that's usually when they really start reading a second, but they learn a lot in kindergarten with letters, and then certainly in first grade where you're starting to put words together. But those early years, that's really where you have a lot of literacy intervention work. If you really want to make an impact on literacy, probably if your activities are just around, well, we're going to send schools books, is probably not going to have the impact that you want. So you need to think through what is really the impact we want to have, and then dedicate the resources and activities that focus on that impact. So that's, again, where your mission statement should sit pretty squarely on the impact that you want to have in your community. And then long term is the vision. If we actually were able to accomplish that impact, what would the world kind of look like? Okay, so let me, because I have a couple of book recommendations, but I will stop there for a second and see if there are any thoughts or questions. We have lots of time, so we can have a chit chat about any of this, things that you're struggling with in your organization, or things that you're like, oh, I wish we had a little bit of guidance on that. Happy to have a conversation. Yeah, go ahead, Nancy.
Well, just kind of a note is it for me, it's really helpful just when you look at the stages to see where we're at. I can see where Bar Food Mart is at, because it was a very grassroots, all volunteer, let's get food to kids. So our mission basically is to alleviate food insecurity to the students, right?
Right.
So a teacher started it because kids were coming to school hungry.
Yep.
In the last, it's been around 8 years. In the last year and a half, we hired our first staff member, right? So we're growing. And then, like you said, we got a lot of money last year for a lot of things, but we tried to use it to buy like new freezers and refrigerators, because if we used it all, we needed those things, and we'll never get that kind of money again, because our mission is to spend our money on food, right?
Right.
So I think just looking at those stages and where we're at, and then the values and how we need to kind of relook at things because we're growing. And then I don't know that our mission is to alleviate or is to stop food insecurity, because I don't know that we've got the capacity to do that.
Right.
But I think, like Miranda said, we've added, I was actually hired originally to do education. So I brought in resources and agencies. And so we're not just giving them food, we're trying to connect them to things in the community. So we look at it holistically, but moving forward, we really need to understand, again, revisit our values and our vision and our mission based on where the organization is at. So that's really helpful to me. So I appreciate that. It's really clarifying some things for me.
Right. And the bumps that you're going to experience, right? I mean, those transitions are really bumpy, and it's not linear. So sometimes
No.
organizations are like, well, we're ready. We got a grant to hire our first staff member. And then bam, something happens and they actually have to go back. And that's okay, but it's not necessarily linear.
Well, it's not. And then you've got, and I'm thinking when you're looking at, and maybe other people like are looking at, so board members that were there from the beginning who maybe, and I'm not in a bad way, but
no,
sort of like we're moving. Do we just, like I said in the beginning, do we just go back to what we were because that's what we did, or do we look forward? And you're right, it's not linear, and people have a lot of different ideas about what that should be. So it seems like a good time to revisit all of this.
Yeah, because I think that's why I start out when I do some strategic planning stuff. Unless you are all in agreement and can act collectively, like these are our values, this is our vision, this is our mission, it's really hard to move forward because somebody wants to go in this direction and somebody wants to go in this direction. When I ran some historic house museums, one of our challenges, I was probably the first executive director hired from outside the organization. They had promoted a volunteer into the first ED. So basically they treated her like a paid volunteer. They didn't trust her. They didn't value her opinion. She was the worker bee, but she didn't have any credibility. So I was the first external hire. But when they were formed, it was about preservation. Like, just save this thing from not being knocked down. Perfect. Okay, now what? Like, that was 20 years ago. It's still here. So now what do we do? Then you have to think about, well, I guess it's not just about preservation. I think, and that's where they got in the next 10 years, was about education. We're just going to tell everybody how awesome this is. We're going to tell everybody that they need to understand local history, and we're going to tell everybody, et cetera, et cetera. So here's what, again, this is what we're going to do to you. So really think through your mission. Is this from your perspective? So organizational preservation, that's a thing. People want organizations to exist in perpetuity, and they do not have to. There is no legal mandate that your organization needs to exist into infinity. It's just not required. So when you think about your organization, is it really about the organization? Like, our organization needs your support. Your organization never needs support. The people that you serve need support. Your organization does not need support. It's a legal structure, right? So don't think about it as, here's what we're going to do to you, or here's why we need your help. That's not the right mindset for an organization that's going to transition into the future, because it's not about you. I mean, there's some humility, I think, that's really required of the sector. It's not about who you are, and it's not about your organization on your legal structure. It's not about the IRS. It's not about your 990s. It's about the impact you have in your community. That has to be front and center so that people understand why you exist and the good that you're doing in the community. And all of you have those things. Like, the organizations were all created for good reasons. But sometimes we forget when we go to write these mission statements. And arts and culture is infamous for this. Education is infamous for this. Here is what we are going to do to you. We are going to educate you, because that assumes you know nothing and I know a lot. So just come to the well, and here's all the things that you don't know, I'm going to tell you. And that's just, it's patronizing. It's disrespectful in many cases. You have no idea why someone is coming to be educated. I hope to not, it's not great. So how do we then change our mission to orient it from the other side? What are your users? What are your members, clients, whatever we're going to call it? From their perspective, why do you need to exist? Thinking through that will help you, I think, articulate what our true mission is. And for those of you in health and human services, or even, food services and all the kind of direct service, there's nothing worse than an organization making you feel like you're a charity. Like, you're just here for a handout. There's nothing worse. I mean, that's humiliating. There's why a lot of people don't go for service, because it's humiliating to do that. And there was an organization that I knew that I think they did food distribution as well as like a clothing pantry and that kind of thing. Well, they didn't really articulate their values well, in my opinion, or they didn't uphold those values, because they would require people to line up outside in full view of everybody driving by at the end of the day when people are coming home from work and you knew they were standing outside this organization. And one time when I was doing that, when I was driving by, there was someone who worked at I think it was the optometrist. She was the front desk person at my optometrist. She had to stand outside with her 2 kids in the middle of the day. I'm like, how awful is that? Like, she's the bravest soul I know to stand out there in public to wait for this perceived handout. That's really, it's really bad from that perspective. There's lots, other people might have different opinions, but from my perspective, that's just not how we want to approach this in order so we break some of that stigma around getting help. Because P.S., we all need help every day in different ways. So I just don't think that's the best way to approach that. I don't know, Miranda, what you think.
We did multi-million-dollar fundraising to build, the most spectacular, beautiful building. It's a community center. It's all this stuff.
Yeah.
And we purchased the signs and everything. And we decided that we weren't even going to hang up the signs because we have so many people drive by and stop and say, what is this amazing building? What do you guys do here? So when they see their neighbors or their friends there, they don't know what they're doing. A lot of people, we kind of built it to look like a really fancy type of barn, because we're kind of rural area and stuff. And a lot of people think it's a feed store or an organic
That's okay.
place.
Right.
We have a community garden and stuff. And we changed it where people get to come in and go shopping. So there's shopping carts out there and stuff. People have no idea. And it is so dignifying.
Right.
And I'll tell you what, working with the thousands of individuals that I've worked with, I'm the only one that does programs, which is kind of amazing in itself. Pat myself on the back. Anyways, to see people come in and ask for help is the hardest, like you said, the hardest thing they've ever done in their life.
Yeah.
So what I try and do, I try and offer it before they ask. And it has changed our numbers from hundreds to thousands. Like I said, it's the hardest thing you'll ever do in your life. And I work from true passion and empathy for people because I was homeless at one point. I had my issues, and I'm a single mom of 7 kids and my husband passed. It's just been a mess.
Right. Everybody has a story, right?
Yeah,
we don't know everybody's story.
But I remember the first time I ever had to ask for help. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And I thought if I asked for help, they were going to take my kids because I wasn't a good parent.
Right.
You know what I mean? So really knowing when we work in these fields to know that people don't want to use us. They don't want that. It's not a bunch of people that want to take advantage of the system and get free stuff. So
right.
Sorry.
No.
My soapbox.
No, I am totally with you. So your organizational values, when you talk about empathy, what does that look like? It's certainly how you treat people. But again, I think it goes to some of those broader things that you were talking about. Building design wasn't something I would necessarily think about. It's just this whole sidewalk thing drove me a little crazy. But there are some physical limitations, I understand, to a lot of those things. And especially potentially with funders, that certain funders will require you to gather certain information. So I know all the constraints to those things, but where we're able to really live our values, people will notice.
And the power of wording. I think that's so we overlook that so much. The power of one word can change everything, you know?
Yeah, I don't like mission statements that just say, here's what we're going to do to you. I just don't. No. I just think there's other ways to word those things. Then please come to me because I'm going to tell you all the things you didn't know.
You know what I compare mission and vision statement to, and this is going to be a really weird analogy, but those door-to-door salesmen that come to your door and they have that piece of siding and they spray that on there and it wipes away. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying? It's that powerful moment. And when people that we're going, for donations to, they're not accessing our services, so they don't see the power in it. So we need to have that mission and vision statement that really wows them,
Yeah.
They need that.
Agreed. So I mentioned this book already, the Building Nonprofit Capacity book, and these are fairly accessible, like in terms of their writing style. This isn't, they both of them, they don't read more as academic, although they're both grounded in research. The nonprofit sustainability one, as you think through your finances, what does this look like? I think as you refine your vision and mission, you should have those kind of thoughts of, how do we know this program is working? How do we measure it? How does it compare to what's already out there in the community? And are we the best organization to provide it? Are you doing so well, just like gangbusters? You have the best outcomes ever. The people that get your programs and services, they are able to change behaviors and live whatever. Then yes, that's where you should dedicate your resources. But if you're really just sprinkling some things in there and you're not having a true impact, maybe it's time to rethink some of where those resources are going. And I know that's hard to have those conversations, particularly with, founding staff or board, that their passion is one direction, but what they're seeing in the data is something else. For those of you who are kind of in the Chicago area, when Hull House closed, the settlement house that was started by Jane Addams, when that closed several years ago, one, it came as a shock that they were still around because it was over 100 years old. But also that it had been dying for many, many, many years. If you watch the organization, because life had changed from the late 1800s to 2000 in Chicago, lot more government services, a lot more nonprofits, a lot more support for individuals. And they were still trying to do it all, right? We're still going to offer education. We're still going to offer childcare. We're going to, we're just going to do everything. And you can't do it all. And I know your budgets, they're not they're not flush with cash. So it is a point to say, what are we really good at? What do we do better than other organizations? What are things that we've proven work? Let's do that. And not add on auxiliary kind of services because you can, because there's interest, because there's a one shot in the arm grant, whatever it happens to be that lures you, and there's lots of different reasons why you get lured. Or we want to do those things, but we don't have to lead it. We can contribute to it. We can partner. We can do those things. We just don't have to own it. And I think those are good conversations to have, especially right now as we're coming out of COVID. Other thoughts or questions that you want to chit chat about? Happy to give you some more ideas or at least some suggestions. Anything burning that you're going to be like, oh, I should talk to my staff or my board members about that?
Do you have any good podcast recommendations around this area?
Mission and vision stuff, or just in general nonprofit stuff?
Both would be
Both.
helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I'll stop sharing for a second so I can. Sometimes we have too many screens in the universe. Okay, so I'll stop sharing for a minute. So there's a couple that I like. Certainly, if you're not a Joan Gary aficionado, I think that's a good train to jump on. She has a lot in there. She has a book that she does, but she also has a really interesting podcast. Sometimes her podcast, the only challenge I have with Joan Gary is sometimes they're just long. Right. So her podcast can go longer than I like. Yeah, Kate, I've read her book and I like her too. She was in DuPage County a couple of years ago giving DuPage Hatter. So it's great. If you have other suggestions, I certainly like, you can throw them in chat. So I like Joan Gary's for hers. I would say there's not a lot of them that are out there are more generalist. And I think it's lacking in the specificity sometimes. So there's not a ton. So I'm not plugging here or anything, but I do a podcast, but it is a generalist. What I've done is interview local people and why they get into providing local community services. So it's more of a conversational thing. It's a half an hour, which I like doing. So you can always find that one too. Mine is called All Things Local because it's people who deliver services at the local level. So I'm not plugging mine, but it's just different. So if anybody else has other suggestions around different podcasts, HBR. Yeah. So Harvard Business Review, the Stanford Social Innovation Group, both of those will lean private sector, but it's not bad. It's just they will lean that way. So more of social entrepreneurs will be in there. They don't, and I don't know because I don't. I'll read HBR once in a while. They're definitely geared towards that social entrepreneur versus some of the other ones. So, fundraising talent podcast. Yeah. I mean, there's a ton of definitely on the fundraising side. I think organizational that I would look for ones that are definitely around sometimes leadership. If your board and staff are struggling with that, I think that's a good one. I don't know if Simon Sinek has his own podcast. I'm not sure. Right now I'm on a little bit of a kick with Malcolm Gladwell's podcast, which is not related to nonprofits, but it's just fun because I like his voice. I think he's fun. Oh yeah. Brene Brown. Oh, you know, I love listening to her, but it's like exhausting. It's like emotional exhaustion. Yeah, but I do like Brene. I have her
Alicia, what
books.
did you
Yeah.
say your podcast was called?
Oh, it's All Things Local.
All Things Local.
Yeah, I'll throw it up here. And I've done, you know, I would love to do one a month. I struggle with doing one a month sometimes with heavy teaching schedules, but I do like that one. I would love to do once a month because I've interviewed people who are in health and human services, who are in the arts, all over the place. I love learning about what you guys are doing on a local level and the struggle with that. You know, there's certainly economies of scale, which, you know, if I was an economist, I would say, well, economies of scale that we should all be, there should be less nonprofits and we should all be doing the same thing, right, for efficiencies. And that's somewhat true, but at the same time, we're all a little bit different and providing choice is not a bad thing. So I'll hear sometimes funders say like, well, there's already a lot of counseling agencies and why do we have so many and who needs all of that? And I get hit up for all these benefits or whatever. And it kind of insinuates that people of lower economic means shouldn't have choice. So there's a little ringing in my head, like, really? Because nobody says we have too many doctors or dentists or shoe stores or grocery stores. But somehow we should only have like one youth counseling agency. Seems a little odd to me. So I do push back a little bit on that. I'm sure that there are some efficiencies that could be realized, but like I study nonprofits. You guys are already like lean and mean. You know, there's not a lot of fluff there. Most of your salaries are going into direct service. So your efficiencies are already pretty efficient. There's not a lot of there. And I have seen, so I would, before when I was in my doctoral program, I was studying municipal government, local government, and I was looking at government mergers and consolidations. And I'll bring this up because I'll come back to this point, but I was studying them because a lot of people were saying there just should be fewer governments. In Illinois, this always comes up all the time. There just needs to be fewer governments. Well, you know what happens when two municipalities merge? They all come up to the highest standard because you have to. Like, nobody's going to take a pay cut. So if the police chief makes X over here, this police chief, when they merge in, he's now going to make X. So a lot of the cost savings get eaten up by everybody coming up to the level. So if you got 2 weeks of vacation and you merge with an organization, they get 3. Now everybody gets 3. Like, that's just the way it works. Like nobody's giving up anything when we go through these mergers and consolidations, which I know, you know, nonprofits, sometimes that makes sense, but it's usually not for a purely financial reason. Usually it's geographic. That makes a lot of sense. If you want to move into an area and an organization ends up merging, that's usually why. It's usually not for some massive savings because you're in service delivery. Like you still need to serve people. That still costs X amount of dollars.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Fumi, and I'm currently in Nigeria.
Mm-hmm.
And but we're also registered 501(c) in the U.S., 501(c)(3).
Mm-hmm.
The one in Nigeria has been in existence for 32 years,
Mm-hmm.
but the one in the U.S. was only registered in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And basically we haven't had an opportunity to do anything with it.
Right.
So actually pretty much the question is, how do I get started there? We have our registration, we have, I mean, a non-functional board. And so it's kind of like, okay, how do we basically take that and run with it?
Where do you think you want to geographically locate? Because some of the question will be that.
I mean, East Coast, it's probably in the Maryland, DC, Northern Virginia area.
Okay. So deciding where you want, because you have to register at the state level, but you have to have a physical presence in that state. So wherever you want to work, so whether that's Maryland, wherever it happens to be. So certainly looking at attorney generals vary across every state, and you have to be registered in whatever state you're going to be soliciting in is their concern. So I would start with one state and figure out if you want to test those programs versus launching a full-fledged, program, is do a pilot. You could partner with another nonprofit that's already there and has some engagement with whatever community you want to serve, and ask them if they'd be willing for you to work on one particular program as a pilot and roll that out and see how that does. and then kind of take it from there. So I'm always of the like slow and easy approach. Test that water, see if you found the right constituency, the right partners. And then similar to what a business person would tell you is, what's the business plan? So where's your funding going to come from? Whether that's, and I don't mean, and I don't use the term generally, financial sustainability, because that's a very mushy word. We get our revenue streams for nonprofits come up from a variety of resources. So what's your anticipation of where the resources are going to come from? Whether that's government, individuals, grants, whatever that happens to be. And then test it. Do you have participants that have the ability to pay for any of that service so you can generate your own revenue? And how much do you anticipate that to be? And where are you going to subsidize the difference? So that's how I would start. Anybody else can chime in, but. Other questions or thoughts?
Yeah, thanks. If you
Sure.
do you also have maybe book website resources that may be useful?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. So you know what? I'll put my email in, and if you guys want to contact me offline or email, then I'll respond to some of your like specific questions, and I'll give you some resources. There's a ton. I mean, it just kind of depends. I think as you know, one of the better ones, if you're looking at particularly boards in the US, is BoardSource. They just have a lot of free resources for documents and policies and procedures and evaluation. BoardSource is a great one to go to. There's lots of, resources just specifically for fundraising. There's a lot on human resources for nonprofits, volunteer management. I mean, you name it. So there's, if you have very specific questions, then I'm happy to give you some suggestions and ideas. So
Wonderful.
I'm curious.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem for me. I'm curious if any of you are thinking about going down that path of doing of kind of embarking on this work like while we're in it, or is this something you're thinking of once we're back to some level of normalcy? We'll see if we can tackle this.
Level of normalcy.
I don't know. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know.
As for me, I have to have one done by the middle of next month, which this month is almost already over. So it will be soon.
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm starting at ground zero. This is brand new. So
brand new.
Plus we're redoing our whole agency one that's been around for 30 years. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, especially if you're starting this from scratch, or even if you're not starting this from scratch or you're new, start small, start humble, prove that you can do these things, and then grow from there. I think sometimes we oversell our ability to really change lives.
Yeah, because people do expect us to do this. Talk is cheap.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
I go as a donor. So
yeah.
The places I donate to, I want to see what they're doing with my money.
And I'd rather you serve fewer people really well than hundreds of thousands of people and had no impact.
Amen to that.
It's really, really hard work that you're doing. So be really humble.
Over quantity.
Yeah.
Quality over quantity, right?
Absolutely. Now that gets tricky with government funders because they like numbers sometimes. So you got to be careful. This isn't Alicia's foundation talking. But you have to be really honest and open with your funders. Like seriously, if you're trying to impact, a felon coming out of prison after 25 years, and you promise that 80% of those clients will have a full-time job within 6 months, I think you're lying to yourself.
Yeah.
Right. So be really humble and honest in your expectations, and educate your donors of how hard your work is. Because it's
not
really
only that, but what I take really serious is giving our participants realistic goals, because life has shown them so many hard things. And then when we tell them, hey, we're going to fix this for you, and we don't, it's just one more defeat in their life that, is negative. And then they start giving up on themselves and everybody else. And then it's just even worse. So
it just spirals.
Realistic goal. I can help you try to obtain these goals, but chances are there will be a little bit of, extra work that needs to be done.
Yeah. I mean, I think of all the things that are easy by most standards of changing our own behavior, and how hard that is.
Yeah, really. Huh?
That's just hard. So if we want to change really negative behavior, that's going to take a long time. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, can we add our hashtag so we can follow each other's? Claudia's asking me. So you want to throw in your emails? or you mean your organizational content, or what were you asking, Claudia?
What's the hashtags so that we can follow each other on Instagram? Because there might be like something that I want to donate to or
Mhm.
follow your organization, you know.
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is a good one if you want to go on LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, I'll do that.
yeah, let's do that.
I don't have a hashtag. Hmm.
Do you have a LinkedIn profile?
Yes, I do. I do have that.
Let's start
Absolutely.
there.
Let's start
I'm on
there.
Twitter too. You guys can follow me there if you want. It's very exciting. It's just A Shatterman. So you can follow me in there. Sometimes I go on rants a little bit on Twitter because I think that's just a fun medium to experiment with. Facebook is like family and people who don't agree with me a lot. And so it's just not fun. It just becomes argumentative. But on Twitter, you can have a little bit of fun over there. So if you really want to get, sometimes the Friday afternoon rant sometimes gets a little crazy, but that's
Right.
LinkedIn if people want to follow. So my latest thing, this is, only because I know you guys got to go. The latest thing was totally unrelated. Independent sector put out their value of volunteer time. Did you guys see that this week? Yeah. I get mad every time it comes out. I get so mad. And here's why I get mad. And you don't have to agree with me, but I get mad a lot at this because we're valuing volunteer labor at higher rates than we do volunteer staff.
Hey.
That is wrong.
Mhm.
And gives the perception that, hey, Joe Schmo off the street, we value your value to this organization at $27 an hour. But Jane, who has a master's degree in education and works with a population that has all kinds of problems, we value her worth at $14 an hour.
Yeah. Right. Who's on salary and work?
Yeah.
80 hours a week.
I'll put my I wrote a blog on this last year because I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
I'll send
Trying
it to you.
tell our board that we're worth more than minimum wage sometimes. Like,
this comes up with a lot of organizations. This is something that you have to consider, is that I know nonprofits value their employees so low because they qualify for their own services they're delivering because they're below the poverty line or considered working poor. So that's also crazy. So that's that's our blog, and so there's a bunch of different stuff in there. You can check it out.
Yeah, about 80% of our participants actually have full-time jobs. That's what blows people away.
And
they think it's all these people that are trying to live off free stuff, and it's like, no.
Especially depending on where you're located. Yeah.
Yes.
One of the things that we're working on is or trying to get engaged with is a little bit with United Way's initiative around Alice. Right. So the working poor is actually more of a concern in many cases.
Yeah.
Because they get they can get thrown off with just like a car repair, and then all of a sudden they're at the food bank this week, and then they get a little bit of money, and then they're not. So they float in and out of kind of needing service.
We did the Alice report here in Skagit County, and it was like 90% of people are a paycheck away from becoming homeless.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
If they were to get a flat tire, they could become homeless.
Correct.
Yeah. They would have to repair their tire to get to work, right? So
if you haven't seen that Alice study from the United Way, they have it down to the county level. And most counties are participating, not all of them, but most counties are participating. I'll pull in the Alice thing here. So you can get the Alice household income for your area. And it's also nicer because it's not, the federal poverty rate isn't pegged to a local market condition. And so the Alice reports are a little bit better measure of financial insecurity.
Love it.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm glad you were all here. I will send you